Adam Savage, welcome to Try This at Home. Thank you so much for being here.
My absolute pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
It feels very strange to welcome you to a podcast about your own show. I feel like we should say thank you for having us. I don't know. I don't quite know what the etiquette is there.
This is one of the first things that's made me feel like an emeritus Mythbuster.
It is, hey, it's well deserved. It absolutely is. We are so excited to get to chat with you. We have been talking to a few of the behind the scenes figures and on camera figures here at the end of our first season, and we can't think of a better way to cap it off. So thanks for your time, and we're super excited.
Oh my gosh, so who have you spoken to? I'm dying to know.
So our last episode that aired when this is airing was with Rob Lee.
Oh, lovely.
And before that, we spoke with Dr. Heather Joseph Witham to talk about her folklore memories of the show. And we actually just did a shorter episode with Andrew Farrell.
Oh, Faz.
So that was his name came up when we were watching the show. We got to the stinky car episode, and we all of a sudden went, "Wait, something feels different. Like there's a lighter tone. Like what's going on?" And I dug into the credits and saw his name, and we were like, "Could this be?" And then we called him, and he said, "Yeah, that was my first episode. That was actually where I started, was doing that, and they wanted me to make it funnier. So we were feeling what was really there. So he was great."
Amazing. Faz was great. Yeah, Faz was one of the first other producers we brought in. That was a terrible day. But sorry, where did you want to begin?
Well, I was going to say, I know that you have told this story a million times, but in the interest of completionism, I would love to hear about when did Mythbusters first hit your desk, and specifically, what was the pitch before the show even existed? What did you think it was going to be or could be?
Okay, so it is the spring of 2002. I have been working at Industrial Light and Magic for 4 years, and it's still freelance work, even though there's a bunch of work. And in freelance, you're always looking for the next thing. You're always trying to figure out, maybe there's an industry you haven't attacked yet. Maybe there's a job that you haven't thought of. So I'm always layering in new skills. And I had bought a digital video ready laptop in January, February of '02, and I had started just that spring teaching myself the rudiments of filmmaking. I would storyboard something, shoot it, cut it, and I was just getting a taste for all of that with the first version of iMovie and a DV cam. And then Jamie, who I had worked for in the 90s and had remained professionally in contact with, because that's freelance life, I would take him out to lunch once a year just to sort of find out what's going on. He calls me. I was working on the Matrix sequels and out at Alameda, and he said, listen, I got this call from a producer at Discovery. They want to make a show called Mythbusters, and they want a demo reel. And I was like, okay, I could show up next week. And he's like, they want one really fast. And I was like, okay, I guess I could show up tomorrow. And so, again, with a backpack, with a laptop and a camera in it, I shot for 2 hours, came back to my house, started cutting the show, and cutting the demo, and the very first thought I had while I was digitizing was I caught a shot of Jamie, and I was like, oh my god, wow, the camera really loves Jamie. It was really specific. Like I had known Jamie at that point for almost 10 years, and I was sick of hearing him talk, but on camera he was totally compelling, and I understood right then what that means, that the camera loves you. I'm like, boy, I hope it loves me. So we cut a demo, 14 minutes long. I still have it. And we sent it in. That Friday, everyone said they loved it. Like Discovery, the production company, and they showed up 3 weeks later with a crew of 5 people. Now, in television, this never happens anymore. Such a lightweight, seat-of-the-pants kind of thing. 5 people show up from Australia. Maybe it's even 4. Yeah, and the 6 of us shoot 3 pilots for Mythbusters in the summer of 2002. We shoot 9 myths over 6 weeks, which was a bear. Yeah. That included Rocket Car, Pop Rocks, a bunch of really early stuff, and then they went back to Australia and cut it for 6 months. You know, you have a new show, you have no idea how it goes together. So 6 months they cut it, and the show goes up in January on Discovery, and they say it's going to take us months before we award a season. It took a week.
Wow.
The first episode got like a 1.7 share, which for a brand new show back then was massive. And they awarded the show right away. And so I think I had like a month and a half of being poorer than I've ever been because I couldn't take a job. I borrowed money from everybody. And then we started production in around like March or April. And I'm not kidding, by May, the first episodes were airing. Or June, the first episodes were airing. So we were making a show we didn't know how to make. No one gave us any advice about being TV hosts. And we were just off to the races, but we're also already getting feedback from this thing we're making. It was still like 5 months before someone recognized me in public. So, you know, our recognition factor in the culture was very, very slow and plodding, which was actually a real grace. The initial concept for Mythbusters was, and this is such a late stage capitalism thing, the initial concept was a hot chick would travel around the United States interviewing people about urban legends, and when they came to a testable phenomena, she would call her boys back in the shop and they would test it out.
Oh my god.
And apparently they had trouble casting this. I mean, they tried casting for like a year and all over the place. And finally they got to us, and they needed someone with a shop because they couldn't afford to build a shop for a pilot. And when they saw our demo reel, they were like, maybe these two guys could do all the hosting and all the building.
Maybe they are the hot chick.
maybe together they're roughly as interesting.
As one hot chick.
It's like that joke from 30 Rock where he's like, we got to get her off television. She's got to lose 30 pounds or gain 70, but knowing her weight belongs on television. That's what we were. We were that equivalent of Muffin Top Jenna from 30 Rock. And that fact that the show started airing before we all knew what it was, I think, part of the secret sauce that Mythbusters is the crucible that forms the show. The earliest ethos of the show was we don't hide anything. We don't hide anybody in the background, and we're not trying to keep people or crew or equipment out of the background. We don't want to create some fake space. We want you to know you're in a grounded space.
What is crazy to hear you say that is we have been responding on our podcast this whole time to what we said is you don't get to see on TV anymore a show find itself. And you can feel that in the earliest episode of Mythbusters. You can feel you guys will do something one week and it doesn't work the right way. And so the next week you'd have a similar situation and do it a different way. And it's so crazy to hear that was literally the process that was going on. I don't know of any other show that captured that.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a free formness to. So the way Discovery Channel works is they don't produce anything themselves. I know they have their own production company, but effectively they don't. They partner up with another production company, and like all major corporations, that is the goal is to slough off all of your responsibility onto someone else. So the production companies take all of the liability, they take all the responsibility, all the financial danger, and a company like Beyond Productions, who made Beyond 2000 and then Beyond Tomorrow for 2 decades, was a very established company, knew how to produce itself, and invested in Mythbusters in a very low-level way, but with a great team. And again, that's the kind of like no edge of television exists like this. This is much more where YouTube is these days.
Especially that speed is what I thought. I was like, that sounds like a YouTube show to be on and out and making something that quickly. It's just unbelievable now.
Yeah, and then also to watch our ratings just continue to rise, and they rose from then until like that's 2003. They rose and stayed stable for the next 7 years.
Wow.
Like it wasn't until early 2010, I think, is when I started to notice them really leveling off and the balance start to tip. I knew the other end of the bell curve was somewhere.
Yeah.
And you said 1.7 on the first episode?
I'm not positive about that number, but it was a surprisingly deep number for what we were.
Just to give listeners context, if you had a 1.7 today, they would just give you the network.
Yeah. The whole thing.
Like,
Keys to the kingdom.
yeah, they're just
Take
like,
it.
own it. You should do this instead of us now.
By the same token, Aaron Sorkin's first show, Sports Night, was canceled in '99 with a 14 share.
Wow.
Because that wasn't enough back then.
Well,
That is, wow, how
Yeah,
TV has changed.
things have,
It's really, it's seriously changed. And I mean, there's so many other, I will tell you the one piece of advice I got. First of all, we were blessed in the first 2 years with two amazing cameramen, Paul Henry and Peter Coleman. And both of them they're very different human beings, but they're both insane, incredible cameramen. There's nothing like standing over the shoulder of a great reality TV cameraman, and Mythbusters was blessed with a half dozen geniuses or more. And you'd stand over their shoulder and watch them just collect B-roll, and every freaking shot had drama, focus pulling. You know, they knew how to give the editor several ins and outs within the same pan.
It's masterful to see
Well,
that happen.
And they would also give Jamie and I feedback. One of the weird things you have to learn when you're hosting in the beginning is everything is closer to you than you think. So when you hold up a pen, you don't hold it up here, you hold it here. And this feels strange in my world, but to you it looks totally normal.
yeah.
I was going to ask, I know you had done some acting when you were younger, and you'd obviously been around theater and film and all that, but it's a big difference to go from behind the scenes mostly to like number one on the call sheet.
Yeah.
What is that? Was that a difficult adjustment for you, or did you enjoy that part of it?
Well, I took to it like a duck to water right away. Not to say that that was easy for me, but I wanted that tension. I really enjoyed that. Also, much of the time, we were building more than we were being on camera. Even though you saw more of us being on camera than building, the reality was the reverse. And when you're building, your self-conscious brain really goes away. Mine does. I'm really able to tune out the camera and concentrate on the problem in front of me. And then the other thing is early on, Jamie and I were blessed with a fantastic producer named Alice Dallow. And Alice is not necessarily the most scientifically minded person back then, but that didn't matter because Alice wouldn't let us finish a piece to camera unless she understood it. And she would just ride us like, I don't quite understand that. You want to say that again?
Yeah. But that had to be so helpful to have somebody that's like, that's not going to translate to a wider audience, you know? Like, this is smart, this is good,
Yeah.
but how do we package this in a way that is understandable?
So that process of me learning how to do a piece to camera, learning how it's going to fit into this narrative, learning how these pieces can go together in different ways, all of that took me about 3 years to sort of layer into my body as both a host and a producer.
Yeah.
And then the by then, which was right around Hindenburg, I felt like, oh, there are some really fun places we could go with this. I started seeing the possibilities. And then actually right around then, I befriended Bill Prady, who's still a really good friend of mine. Bill created Big Bang Theory with Chuck Lorre. And I visited the set of Big Bang Theory. They were fans of Mythbusters early on, as you could imagine. And Bill and one of his comedy writers were complaining to me about Ninjas episode. They were like, there are no ninjas. The line was broken. They said, it's as valid as doing a show about Minutemen. And one of the writers goes, Bill, you're a Minuteman, aren't you? And Bill goes, yeah. And then they start doing this comedy routine, back and forth, improvised, about Bill being a Minuteman, and his comedy writer is an interviewer. And they go back and forth, where do you keep your stuff? Oh, in the back of the Prius. What kind of stuff do you have in there? Well, I got my pack, I got some sodas, etc. All this 5 minutes of questions. And he's like, so if you get the signal, how quickly can you get ready? And he's like, about 4 or 5 minutes. And I was like, how did you do that? That was like a magic trick. How did the writer know? How did you know? And Bill said, look, you have to understand, comedy writers, once you're a comedy writer, you know all the jokes. You know all the setups and how they're going to deliver. So I hear a premise. I know exactly what the joke is. And the question is, how long can I take to get there? And
Genius.
that informed for me after Hindenburg and they're like episodes 68, 69, 70 until the end was every time I knew what the punchline was, i.e. what the ridiculous final experiment was, I knew how the episode would lay out. It was like that final... and let's be clear, all the science in Mythbusters happens by Act 3 or 4, right? All the scale experiments are where the real meat of information happens. And the big experiment at the end is to keep you around for the last 2 commercial breaks.
Yeah.
But its absurdity informs the shape of the whole episode.
Yeah.
Well, that goes to something I wanted to talk about is something we've said a lot on our show is when we told people, hey, we're doing a Mythbusters podcast, the response you'll get sometimes is like, oh, that's the show where they blew stuff up. And you go, yes, a lot of stuff did blow up, but it was in service of a story. And for us, the storytelling is what has kept us coming back. It's the reason we can still watch these episodes all these years later. Is there was always a great story at the core of what you guys were doing. How did you think about that? Obviously, that was an evolution of that, but how did you guys think about the storytelling aspect of what you were doing?
The primary guide was truth. And look, television is television, and as a producer, you have to make compromises. Sometimes you have a very thin plot connection between this act and the next, and you just gotta do it. But if you don't have to, if you can tell the truth about what you're doing, and there was really, on the entire crew, a really deep ethos not to underserve the truth of the thing. And that is to say, not to just throw in an extra thing just because you need 4 more minutes in the cut, but really to, like, I remember Break Step Bridge, the very first attempt at Break Step Bridge, me and one of my producers were yelling at each other. Yelling. We were tired and this wasn't working, but and when we were yelling at each other, I realized we were yelling about the same thing. We both really wanted this experiment to have some integrity, and our engineering wasn't good enough to get there. And this was confusing and upsetting. So I realized that the ethos here was like, we both wanted to do the same thing. We wanted an experiment that would yield an actual result we felt like we could stand by. And building a bridge is a ridiculously complex engineering challenge. It's one of the few in the early days I'm like, we should have waited a few years to do that one.
Yeah.
We just covered that episode just a couple of months ago on our show, and it's funny to hear you say that because one of my takeaways was, man, this episode feels tense.
Yeah.
Like I can feel something in the episode that this is really difficult to do.
Well, and were you watching the one with the full-size bridge that we did with the little robots?
Yeah, the little actuated robots.
The biggest fight Jamie and I ever had in the first half of the show. Because I was like, there's no... on a millisecond timing, there is no periodicity with a pneumatic cylinder. It's just never going to hit a super precise timing. And thus, this whole thing is moot. And Jamie was like, I really think the image is cute. And man, the number of times he rode me so hard about an aesthetic choice I was making. And years and years and years later, we had another argument about something else. And, whenever we got into it, we would try and unpack it to mend the relationship. And he was like, well, listen, I guess in certain cases, it's, we should just, if we're having an argument, we should let the science win. And I was like, oh, do you have an example? And he was like, with Break Step Bridge, I blah, 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 blah. And then I watched him go, oh, yeah, I guess I realized that was my fault there. I had the wrong decision. And I was all like, yes, I didn't have to say it. But this isn't an episode for me to bury all sorts of hatchets.
Well, I did want to say, look, obviously the relationship between the two of you has taken on its own mythology over the years, but it's such a key part, especially in the early days. We have loved seeing that come out more and more on the show and get used for the value in the show and the conflict on the show, the comedic value as you guys kind of became characters. Was that a natural thing, or was there a point where you went, oh, this is actually part of the show?
So it evolved, and it evolved in some interesting behind-the-scenes way. In the very beginning, one of production's ideas was a classic reality TV idea, which is these episodes will be more interesting if Jamie and Adam are at odds. And so there was a lot of what the British would call pissing in our ears. Production telling me something to make me mad at Jamie and vice versa. And one of the rules that still exists in television is if you are on a thing and it becomes a hit fast, you will be renegotiating your contract. Like, that's just when there's a ton of money on the table, a contract renegotiation is sort of inevitable. And so we had signed a contract for the first couple of seasons of Mythbusters, but then another one showed up. And in the signing of that, we got a lawyer and we negotiated. And in the getting of a lawyer and negotiating, which is its own adventure, Jamie and I discovered that each of us weren't the enemy. And from that moment on, we decided that what conflict might exist absolutely belongs on camera, but there's no ginning it up. There's no putting a finger on the scales. And we were willing to let that conflict play out, but it was so much less stressful having that be on our terms rather than on this external sort of framework.
Well, it seems to make for a better show, too, in the sense that what comes across on the show is that you guys are so different that you don't have to put something in somebody's ear. These are these are left brain and right brain that are going to conflict in fun ways because you're doing hard things and like it feels natural. It goes back to that truth of it's what's really there.
Yeah.
Seems to make a much more entertaining show than, Big Brother, we're going to come in and tell one person one thing and somebody else something else.
I totally agree with you. And, for us, the real pleasure of working together was the feeling of two minds working on a same track. And it, like, neither of us would seek the other out. We don't like working together. We drove each other batty. But, man, there were some moments where I know both of us just felt like we're, like, skating along on this mental train track and looking over, and there's the other one, and we're on the exact same trajectory. And, man, the world just feels like we got it between our hands.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan, and I believe these guys are friends of yours. I'm a huge fan of Penn and Teller.
Yeah.
And they've always talked about kind of a similar relationship. And I remember hearing Penn Jillette say one time, people assume that in the lack of a warmth in a relationship, there must be animosity. And he was like, no, there doesn't have to be. You can not be friends and still have an incredibly cohesive working experience together as they have. And that's what really always seemed to me to come through on Mythbusters of these are two different people, but that's kind of the fun.
Yeah.
At one point, I called Teller, and we had an hour-long conversation because I was like, "How do you do this, man?" Because I knew how their relationship. I knew some about their relationship, and he was incredibly gracious. And it turned out, that we were doing a lot of the right stuff. It's just it's not an easy relationship to manage, but professionally, I know this about Penn and Teller. Professionally, they push each other really hard in the best way. I know that this could be better. I know that this, and their points of view are different, and they work with that difference. They've worked with that tension. I found their relationship incredibly inspiring in that regard. And yeah, you don't have to get along to do great work together.
Yeah.
I think that's really important to come through on the show and in the way that the inspiration that it has left for people. We mentioned before we went on the air, and I've said it on our show that the show inspired me to do what I do. We've seen moments on the show of where they would put in the edit you guys apologizing to each other. Yeah. And I was like, man, that's unique. Like that feels like a lesser show wouldn't have completed the tension. Wouldn't have actually closed that arc. They would have, like you said, oh no, let's leave it up in the air. Let's watch them fight. That's going to be the fun.
Well, I also think that is a testament to how tight and close the crew felt, right? Like, I believe I can still probably name most of my core crew over the whole 13 years of Mythbusters. Right, they're all in my head and my heart. And I remember a young guy was hosting a new show for a cable channel. This is about 15 years ago, and he was like, "Do you have any advice? The first season was really rough." And I said, "You should watch your takes as much as you can." It's not going to be fun. It's awful to watch yourself on camera, but take a look at your takes and you'll get a lot of understanding of how you're doing. And he's like, you're allowed to do that? And I was like, what? You're on a production and no one's told you to watch your takes? That's crazy. And that you're distant enough from the cameraman and your producer that you don't know if you're allowed to ask to see the take you just shot? That's a terrible reality.
Yeah.
That was nowhere near our reality where the cameraman would be so excited. Look at what I got. Come and look at this shot. And we're like mooning over the cool thing we just filmed. There was a time on quicksand. We were doing quicksand, and we had this scaffolding set up around this 18-foot tall container, 6 feet wide, that held our quicksand. And the scaffolding, I was on it, and it fell over. Oh, God. And as it's falling over, I see that it's falling over, and I climbed under the railing and over to the other side, and as it hit the ground, I literally stepped off. It was one of these, like, I saw the reality, and I entered the Matrix, and I stepped up. And my cameraman, Peter Heath, was like, mate, I wasn't running.
Oh, no.
Oh, the coolest moment of your life, and it's not
The
on camera.
coolest moment of my life. I climbed under a railing while it was tilting and stepped off into the Matrix.
It's never going to be more Indiana Jones than that.
No.
Never.
And you can't duplicate it. Like, there's no reality in which it happens again.
Because on take 2, you die. So there's no doing that again.
Or worse, you break your toe and lose a week.
Yes.
Right? An ignominious injury.
Much worse.
We've mentioned a couple of specific myths, and we had a few that we wanted to bring up. But as we get into that, something that I've heard you talk a little bit about over the years, and for folks who are watching this on video, they see that you are joining us from the infamous cave in San Francisco, and we have delighted in what a character San Francisco is in the show. And we've started calling it the expanded Imaginarium of Mythbusters because there's just all these wonderful places, and around, obviously you guys go to the Mojave and you go to all these, places outside of San Francisco proper, but all the different stores that you would go to, a surprising amount of sex shops that come back on the show time and time again. I would just love to hear you talk about how you feel that environment influenced the show that Mythbusters was.
That environment informed us significantly. Both Jamie and I found our way to San Francisco and found a city that welcomed us. And both of us should have ended up in LA wanting to work in special effects. Jamie moved out from New York to work in special effects. Now, there were a lot more model shops up here at the time he moved out. But there's a way in which San Francisco, like the first time I saw the city, which is in 1988, I was like, this is the most beautiful city I've ever been in. And the character of San Francisco, to me, is one that welcomes everyone to try what they want, try out their thing. Hence the sex shops. Like, let your freak flag fly. It's totally cool. And it was so much fun showing those faces of San Francisco early on and bringing them into the show, because I think this place is amazing. And I think it's amazing that George Lucas, that Francis Coppola, both in their 20s, having achieved a huge amount of success in Hollywood, still decide, the hell with Los Angeles, let's move up to San Francisco and build our own thing. Robin Williams brought billions of dollars of filmmaking to San Francisco because he lived here and he loved it here and he supported the city and the city supported him. I just think this is a remarkable location in the world.
There's a moment, and I do not expect you to remember this, but we had to ask because if you do, it has plagued us on our entire show.
Oh, I'm dying to hear.
I think it's the first time you guys make a ballistic gel torso. And you're looking for, at least in the run of the show, and you're looking for a place a refrigerator to store it. And so it's like a deli that I think is the location where you guys go.
Yeah.
And you're wheeling this thing through, and in the background are two guys in what appear to be full orange convict jumpsuits sitting at a table eating lunch. And it's never mentioned in the show. It just goes right by, and we're watching the show and going, Is this attached to the prison?
Where are they?
Where are they? What is happening? I just had to ask, is there
Oh.
any story there that you remember at
No,
all?
I don't. I honestly don't know. I believe that deli was Oscar's Deli around the corner from Jamie's shop on Cesar Chavez, just east of Evans. And I think we just got permission from them to take over their freezer for the night. Those guys were definitely not in prison jumpsuits. It could have been that they were highway workers.
Yeah.
That could be, but yeah. I'm sorry, I don't know.
No,
No,
we didn't expect it, but it's just it's one of those earworms, you know, it has gotten into my brain. I could not give it up. Another great San Francisco moment on the show is one of our favorite episodes. So just so you know, we're now 16 episodes in, is where our first season left off. So
All right.
that is how far we have watched. But our favorite episode, I think, so far has been Escape from Alcatraz and that myth. So I just have to ask about what you remember about how that came together, and how giddy were you when you realized you were going to get to do that?
Amazing. It's still an insane thing that we got to do, and it's funny that you ask about it because I was just thinking about it in the last week.
Oh wow!
I got to crawl through the hole.
Yes,
Yes!
the actual hole.
Who authorized that?
You go behind the plexiglass, like there's a shot where you walk around the you're not supposed to be here part. It's awesome.
That was so much fun. So that was one of the most important episodes for me as a scientist, because and an engineer, because first I read all 1,600 pages of the FBI report, and then the Maritime Museum had a chunk of the original raft in a bucket left by Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, and we got to inspect that. And when we did, we understood, oh, they had taken the path of least resistance. What they left was one of 4 pontoons because they realized they didn't need it. It's a triangle. Boom. I think that we came to the exact right conclusion of the structure of their boat for the first time, because this is the first time real builders looked at this problem to solve it.
Wow. And a lot
that
of
was
that.
a collaborative effort on the whole team's part. Actually, the hardest part of that episode was finding latex raincoats, because they are quite rare. And our budget was small, so getting a whole bunch of them in time was tricky.
Yeah.
And it looked like, because there is a scene where you guys are using a different type of raincoat, and you go, this isn't going to work, and you get something else, and the other ones look identical to the original. Like, it was one for one. It's one of the first times we see on this show that the replication is perfect for what you guys were doing.
And that, late in the series, in the last season, we went back over all the early myths together as a team to ask, is there a story worth refilming in its entirety? And we couldn't find one. And Alcatraz, I think, is one of the best early stories we did, because the material is so meaty. The amount of cooperation we got from the city, the county, the fire marshal, the bay people was over the top. And it's a perfect replication. We entered the water under the same tidal conditions, at the same moment the tide is going out. All of that was great. The most surprising thing to me was how not cold we were. I was scooping water into my pea coat to wash it over my chest to cool down, because I was so activated. And by the way, if you watch that episode again, you'll notice Jamie's paddles are kind of broken.
We reached out. He sent us a statement that we read on an episode to Will Abbott, who was the third man in the boat for that episode.
Oh,
And
young Will.
We found it hilarious that the third man in the boat is like, well, let's grab the shop intern, and all of a sudden he's in there just paddling away. It's like, wow, what a job. And he said that he has nothing but fond memories of doing that. But it's like, man, what a ragtag, let's get the crew together and hop in a boat kind of way to make a show. It's awesome.
And that's absolutely, that was the whole ethos of the show. The crew felt like there wasn't crew, hosts, talent, production. It was all one unit.
Were you ever contacted by authorities after that episode? Because that one really feels like y'all may have landed on some new information that was not really previously considered.
The most surprising thing that we discovered was how easy it was to, if all the parameters lined up, to get your boat from Alcatraz to the North Shore.
Yeah.
But any review of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers' arrest history shows that these were not the sharpest tacks in the toolbox. And I struggle to imagine any of the three of them keeping their mouths shut for decades.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the main thing, is that just they would talk about it. I mean, they got away, you know? That's like the coolest thing.
Later in the series, when we do Salsa Prison Escape, we definitely got some letters from correction officers about that episode.
Okay. Looking
There's
forward
one
to
thing,
it.
I wanted to highlight a production thing which you're just about to start to witness, which is the evolution of how the camera shots are set up. And what you'll notice if you look at shots from the last season versus the first season is that all the B camera shots in the last season have much more tape and arrows and numbers and things in them. And that grew specifically out of a desire on my part as a producer to set up every single camera so that you had a narrative of the frame. That there was a thing and there was clearly a line and something was going to come down this line and touch this thing. The more you give the audience visual cues, the less work they have to do to figure out what's going on. And the colored tape and the graphical element, and our last A camera, Scott Sorensen, or Saza, Saws really took to that labeling and taping within the camera frame because it gave so much richness to. So we'd have like 14 camera shots, and each one had been sculpted to show that drama of what was going to occur.
How did Buster play in as part of that? Because we've just hit that part of the show, and obviously now he's the mascot. Everybody thinks of Buster as part of the show. You guys kind of introduced him as like, we got a dummy for this test. And
Yeah.
did you imagine he was going to be a part of the visual language of the show, or was it more of a we need a dummy this week kind of thing?
It was not we need a dummy this week. It was actually once the show awarded after the pilots, I got on the phone and was like, I think we need a crash test dummy. And I thought to myself, okay, if we're going to get a crash test dummy, this is an expensive bit of kit. I didn't even know how expensive. $600,000 for a new one.
Wow.
But I noticed that the new ones were called Hybrid 3s. And I was like, what about a Hybrid 2? I'm sure there's a Hybrid 2. And I was right. And I got a government agency on the phone, and I got the director on the phone, and I told him what we were doing. And he said, okay, yeah, we have a Hybrid 2. We're happy to sell it to you, but you can never mention where you got it from or who you got it from. And when you're finally done in every way, maybe you could send us the burnt parts so we can cross it off our inventory. And that part never happened. But we got a Hybrid 2 dummy in, and I was just thinking of it as another experimental platform, as another tool for our storytelling. I didn't yet realize that Buster wasn't a thing. Buster was a concept. People ask how many Busters there were, and the answer is, how many times did you see him get destroyed? One Buster for every time. There was an international church of Buster because he's been resuscitated so many times for your knowledge.
He keeps coming back. We can't put him down.
That's
No.
my new church, the Flying Spaghetti Monster. It's going to be the International Church of Buster. That's what I want in my life.
I belong to the Holy Order of Buster.
Yes, absolutely.
And once the storytelling was always as much about the methodologies as it was about the results of those methodologies. And how much Jamie and I and all the other hosts leaned into both the philosophy and the gear, right? We love the gear, but the philosophy is where we learn. And, Buster was a spectacular platform for that. I mean, right off the bat, Jamie and I were like looking at these loose fittings and these tolerances for a thing meant to be crashed over and over and over again. We learned a lot from that, including that almost everything we wanted to do with Buster exceeded his ratings in every way. We thought, he'll be able to take anything, and we broke that leg off on the first experiment.
That was the water drop, right? The
Yeah.
hammer bridge drop. That was one of the most amazing And to your point about Buster as a testing platform, to see that leg get ripped off and to think that this was just dropping into water that did it, we said on our show, we were like, I knew that it's bad to drop into water, but the level of destruction, unbelievable. And there was no better way to do that than with something like Buster that could do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want you to know that Jamie went back to Mare Island on his own on a weekend with a clamming rake and found that leg. When it,
Yes.
I had called the original agency and they were like, "We can give you another leg, but it's going to be like $25,000."
Wow.
No, I got this.
Yeah,
Give me
Jamie
a
was
rake.
Like, Monday morning, Jamie was like, "I got it."
Talking about the methodology as part of the storytelling, an episode and a myth specifically that I'm sure our audience is tired of hearing me talk about because I've brought it up all season long is the leaping lawyer.
The leaping.
The leaping lawyer.
Oh yeah.
And here's my reaction to that episode, and I would love to know if I'm reading into this or if this is something that was really there. It's the first time where it feels like the basic question about breaking a window, when it's teed up on the show, not as spectacular as Jado Rocket Car or something, right? But the storytelling becomes, as you said, the methodology. And it becomes important to know, you guys cover the pressure at altitude and the specifics of that type of glass and weight distribution on a body. And the experimentation becomes the story to the point that by the time that glass breaks, I'm cheering.
Yeah.
And that is story through methodology. And it was the first time I really felt like in these early episodes, I was like, oh, that's Mythbusters. I'm recognizing the show that I fell in love with. Was that, do you recall anything from that myth specifically or how that played into the early days of your testing?
What I can tell you is we were literally just trying to tell that story. We were overlapping our ignorance to try and figure out how to talk about pressure differentials and the varying pressures on glass, etc. And it wasn't until much, much later that I zoomed out and realized that all of that storytelling around us just trying to figure out this methodology was what educated the audience because it was happening to us at the same time.
Yeah.
Years later, I think we were shooting the Pirates of the Caribbean myth in a pool, and Discovery was thinking about going 3D, so they brought out James Cameron's lead 3D producer to spend 2 days with us.
Wow.
And he was a lovely guy, and it was really fun to have him watch us go. And halfway through the second day, he turns to my EP, Dan Tapster, and he says, "Let me get this straight. The experiment takes precedence over the filming?" And Dan was like, I've never thought of it that way, but yes, it does. And he's like, I would never have imagined that model could work. But that was really, and going back to saying that we didn't gin up the episodes needlessly. There were many times when an episode would get broken down and we would do the story break at the beginning of each shooting block, but then Dan would refine that story break down for the editors to give them some expectation of what might show up for their cut and how to sort of tell that story. And that would change, but he had to give them a sort of a more precise target than our story break did. And in that, he would sometimes look and be like, it's going to be light here, so let's do an experiment where Adam tests different reds. And it would be like a totally bullshit experiment. And it wasn't Dan saying you should do something that's bullshit. It was more like Dan saying, we need 4 minutes here to pad this out. And I'd be like, okay, let's not do that experiment. Maybe I'll put on a costume and I'll try this thing, and then maybe we'll add this part to it. And that was the origin of my cosplaying, frankly, was Mythbusters, was realizing if I put on a costume, number one, I had a lot of fun that day. There were lots of opportunities for comedy and for annoying Jamie. It rounded out this narrative in a way that felt much more natural because I was having fun.
Yeah.
And I mean, by the same token, Jamie was like, I think passing sodas between two cars is stupid. And I said, but we got to build a gun that shoots a soda can. And he's like, I love this episode. Let's do it.
I'm in.
If it's something we were excited about, it's going to be a much better episode.
Yeah.
From something that you had fun with to something I cannot imagine was fun. You mentioned earlier the stinky car episode.
Yeah.
Which is, and we mean this in the best way, it's the grossest hour of television I think I've ever watched. In the best way.
Yeah.
We were delighted by that episode this season. It's one of the first times we see you guys in a situation where you really seem like, oh, this is deeper than we meant to wade in this moment. What do you remember? What can you tell us about that episode?
Oh my gosh. First of all, we sealed those pigs in that Corvette in a rented truck container.
No.
Oh no.
We're terrible, terrible people. And let me tell you, the juice that comes out of that car, one drop of it would be enough for you to I gotta sell my car. Like, this stuff was the most powerful, you need to run in the other direction smell. The other thing from that episode is Neil Smither.
Yes.
The crime scene cleaner. That guy, so for the audience, Neil Smither discovered his life's purpose in 1994 watching Pulp Fiction when
I told
Vince and
you!
Jules shoot their compadre in the back of the Cadillac and have to clean it up. And Neil was like, that's me. I've got to do that for a living. So halfway through, and also to be really clear, when we pulled that Corvette out, it's in the episode, we had left the emergency brake on. So Jamie had to reach effectively through a pig. He had to sit in one of them to undo the emergency brake to get it back out. And these were no longer pigs or even rotten pigs. They were more like pig-shaped mounds of rotten pudding.
Oh no.
And it was all that consistency of pudding that's been left out for a week. Oh, it was. So we're scooping this out. We're wearing all of the PPE and it's not working. We can smell it. We feel awful. It's hot. We're sweaty. You don't want to touch anything. And Neil Smither yells to me, Adam, Adam, Adam. And I'm just about to pull the head of the second pig out.
Oh.
And he goes, Adam, I will give you $5,000 to lick the snout of that pig. And I turn to him, and of course I think about it.
Of course.
Yeah,
And he goes, I don't mean no, I mean like that. And I went, oh, no.
Nope.
I have talked to people since then who have said, oh, I would have taken $5,000 for that. And I'm like, no, you wouldn't. Your tongue would be like, cut me out, please, right away.
Yeah. We're in open rebellion now. I'm not doing that.
It makes me so happy you mentioned Neil because we just did an episode recapping some of our favorite things that we've seen so far, and he was our favorite side character.
Absolutely.
Because there's a line that he has where he smells the air and says, "Oh, it's just good old-fashioned death." And it was like, this man is a quote machine, and we literally referred to him all season as the real life wolf. So that is perfect.
Yeah, Neil was an amazing and lovely character. God, we had so many of them. At one point when we're doing, have we done Pigs in Concrete, the Jimmy Hoffa story yet?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not sure if this is in the episode, but they were like, hey, you should talk to the cement truck guy. And just while we're filling it up. And I was like, hey, have you ever sealed a body in concrete? And he goes, hey, man, I just bring the truck to the garage. Whatever you do in there is your business. And I was like, oh my God, he just admitted to burying some bodies.
The perfect answer. The perfect non-answer.
He has the most sober also recap of the Hoffa myth in that episode where he's just like, yeah, I think he's long gone by now. It's like, whoa, the concrete guy knows what he's talking about. Oh my God, that is amazing. Oh, another.
Did we talk about how we got the pigs? So
No.
way back then, it was before we knew the local butcher and could get a whole pig, and also we had some issues around wasting that much meat. In the future, when we used pigs as much as we could, we would donate the meat. There was all sorts of ways we worked to process that stuff. But back then, we were complete newbies. So we called up a place in LA that supplied dead animals for Hollywood films. And the way they did it was they had beads on all these farms in the Central Valley down there in the South, so that when an animal died naturally, they knew about it right away and could deliver it to a production.
Wow.
So that meant that we got a call at 4 p.m. one day, and we sent a PA all the way past Bakersfield to the bottom of the Central Valley to arrive around midnight and have some farmer in the dark help load 2 bodies into the back of his pickup truck. and then drive another 5 hours back to San Francisco. And he was like, he got there the next morning and he was like, that's the worst thing I have ever done.
Oh.
Because they're not fresh when they arrive.
No,
We commented on
smell
that.
would waft over him. It was horrendous.
Did Jamie own his shop?
Yeah.
Okay, because you mentioned the rented container. When you guys started digging up the walkway in front of Jamie's place, I was like, I hope he doesn't rent, because we're about to put 2 pigs and who I assume the whatever would be left is still there, because I think y'all put the concrete back on at the end.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah, we did. They're still there. There was a lot of asking for forgiveness instead of permission.
That seems like another Mythbusters ethos for sure. Oh man, that is so great. We have also been stunned. There's, of course, with you in particular, you're associated with a lot of great one-liners from the course of the show, and we were surprised at how many just in the first 16 episodes have already popped up. I Reject Your Reality is already there. So many of these are already here. There is one famous one, and that we laughed so much when it actually saw it in context, is Am I Missing an Eyebrow? And the reason it made us laugh is people always use the first half of the clip and not the second half. When you're laughing, you're being a great sport about it until you find out your hair is gone and all the mirth is immediately drained out of your body and the whole episode changes. And seeing that in context slayed us. So I had to ask about the second half of that famous moment.
I so appreciate that you're highlighting this, because I'm always letting people know my favorite part of that moment is how my ego arrives and my humor disappears. Yes. And I want to let you know that, like, it's totally clear that that's my ego arriving and my humor leaving. That is not a moment a lot of people leave on television.
Yeah.
I will tell you later on, I was working with a co-host, and I won't name them because everyone makes their own decisions, but I was working with a co-host, and the co-host had been covered in a way and had been called grouchy by the narrator of the show we were working on. And that co-host said, I want to remove all the stuff where I'm grouchy. And I called them up and I was like, that's totally your prerogative. I have also had things removed from episodes I didn't want to be in there. But on this front, I counseled them, let that stay, because it's really you. And when you are on the camera, it's much more of a hug to the audience. My advice is morality. Let yourself be on camera with all of the ways that you are. And they rejected that, which is fine. That's their prerogative. But I think that that's what's important about being truthful and present with your audience. There's a memoirist named Mary Carr who wrote an amazing book called Liars Club. And when she was writing her memoir, one of her friends, who was a famous memoirist, told her, hey, when you're writing about yourself as a little person, as a little girl, as a kid, don't try and hide how venal and shitty you might have been as a child. And the way he described it was, he said, take no cure for your dignity. And
10 out of
that's,
10.
to me, what it means to be on camera. Now, there are other people with totally different ethoses and moralities about how to do that. But for me, my dignity isn't worth hiding. Right? And great television and storytelling is often opposed to one's dignity.
Yeah.
Because I'm a person on camera. I'm going through what I'm going through, and sometimes it's not fun. And being willing to let it show that it's not fun, to me, is a really important ethos that typifies the show.
That is a great segue here, because obviously we're coming to time. We want to be respectful of your time, and we are still in the early days of our rewatch. We're only 16 episodes in, so we are reliving all of this and getting to go through it again. But in reality, it's been over 20 years since these days, and I am sure not a day has gone past since then that Mythbusters has not been part of your life. Now, all these years later, how do you feel about the show, the work that you did, and the legacy that it's had?
I could not be more proud and grateful that I got to do that. I want to ask you guys, please bring me back at the end of the next season. I'd love to recap this at the end of each season you're watching, because
Would love to.
you're really dialing into many of the elements I loved so much about the show. The main one being the camaraderie of building a 22, 25 person machine for problem solving.
Yeah.
When you have me on next, I'll tell you about what Mythbusters had to teach Blue Origin.
Wow.
And, you know, it turned me into a scientist. It turned me into an engineer. And I own both of those terms now in a way that I really, really wouldn't have in the first 5 years of the show. Because, I mean, one of the most surprising things that happened early on is Jamie and I would go to Zircon or some other technology company, and the engineers, we'd be driving back from location, and each of us would be like, they were talking to us like we knew what they were saying. Like, they were treating us like we're actual peers. And it was years before we realized that we were. That what they saw in the cast of Mythbusters was 5 minds plus a few others that were curious about how the world worked. And that's the only requirement for entry into the panoply of engineers and scientists, is like being interested in solving those problems with rigor.
Well, we appreciate that you guys did that and that you lived that on camera. It definitely influenced us, and I think a lot of people who listen to the show. So we will absolutely have you back, or re-invite ourselves into your world of Mythbusters as we did on this episode. Adam, thank you so much for the time. This has been an absolute blast. We are looking so forward to what is to come next on the show, and we can't wait to keep talking about it.
Cliff, Harrison, thank you so much for having me on, and I will see you guys next time. This has been a total delight.